Please welcome to the stage the Provost of the University of Washington, Tricia Serio.
Thank you very much. And welcome to the annual University Faculty Lecture. I'm Tricia Serio. I'm the Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs. Whether you're attending in person or online, thank you for taking time this evening to join us in recognizing faculty excellence. I'll start by acknowledging the Coast Salish peoples of this land I stand on, land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot Nation. I want to give a special welcome to our regents who are attending either in person or online: Constance Thrice, Alexis Harris, Maggie Walker, Lyndon Rhodes, Blaine Tamaki, David Zeke, and Leonore Fuller. The University Faculty Lecture Award was established in 1976, and it honors a current or emeritus faculty member whose research, scholarship, or art is widely recognized by their peers and whose achievements have substantially impacted their profession, the research or performance of others, and possibly society as a whole, and that's certainly true today. The award is one of the highest honors bestowed upon our faculty. Selected by fellow faculty members, each recipient is invited to present their work to the university community. Past recipients have included artists, global health experts, physicists, and anthropologists. And this year's recipient is Kate Starbird, professor in the Department of Human Design and Engineering in the College of Engineering. She's also the co-founder and past director of the UW Center for an Informed Public, an interdisciplinary research hub which formed in 2019 around a shared mission of resisting strategic misinformation, promoting an informed society, and strengthening democratic discourse, all incredibly important in this moment. Kate Starbird's groundbreaking research has made her the leading academic and public voice on one of the most pressing societal issues, the spread of misinformation and disinformation. Her work, which examines how social media and other digital technologies are used during crisis events, is pertinent to many global concerns, including climate, public health, democracy, social justice, and education. Her timely research also leads to broader questions about the intersection of technology and society, including the vast potential for online social platforms to empower people to work together to solve problems, as well as salient concerns related to abuse and manipulation of and through these platforms, and the consequent erosion of trust in institutions. Today, Professor Starbird will discuss her current focus on how online rumors, misinformation, and disinformation are produced and spread during crises and breaking news events. She's especially interested in the participatory nature of rumors and online disinformation campaigns and the roles we and others play on social media and beyond. Please join me in welcoming our university faculty lecturer, Professor Kate Starbird.
All right, thank you. I'm just thrilled to be here today to have an opportunity to share my team's research with all of you. I'm truly honored to have been chosen by the UW faculty to give this lecture, and thankful to the colleagues in my department, Human Centered Design and Engineering, and also at the Center for Informed Public for nominating me to be able to give this talk. I'm waiting for the slides to come through. I've brought a lot of content. All right, I brought a lot of content, so I am going to jump right in. And I'm going to start here with a tweet that was shared in 2017 during Hurricane Harvey. Has anyone seen this image before? A shark ostensibly swimming in the floodwaters of the hurricane. Now, for those of us studying disaster events on social media, we saw this same shark allegedly swimming on the freeway in every major hurricane from Hurricane Sandy in 2012 to Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Now, the story was entirely false, the image fake. But that didn't stop social media posts like this one from receiving massive amounts of online attention. In this case, hundreds of thousands of engagements in the form of comments, likes, and retweets. Now, fast forward to the LA fires last month, and these same dynamics have, if anything, gotten worse. Can anyone see anything wrong with this image? Yeah, there's an extra D on there. It's fake. It's a synthetic image made by generative AI or artificial intelligence. Now, during the LA fires, online spaces were filled with images like this. AI slop photos and videos meant to grab your attention. But that wasn't the only source of false claims. We also saw conspiracy theories about the LA fires being a planned event, which is a common trope that's been repeated during fire events all over the world in the past few years, including the devastating fires in Maui last year. In both events, we saw hundreds of political point-scoring rumors designed to exploit the tragedy for political gain and to garner attention in the form of likes and reposts along the way. Now, these are all behaviors my team has been studying and seeing and studying on social media during wildfires and other crisis events for more than a decade now. Now, rumors aren't new. This isn't something that just came up with the internet. They've always been a part of how we make sense of crises and novel events. But they are supercharged in our modern moment and within our modern information systems. And the reasons why shed light on so many things, including the reconfiguration of political systems around the world. So let me explain. And as I do, I'm going to tell you a story about my team's research over the last 10, 15 years or so. So before I get too deep, I want to get some of the academic-y stuff out of the way. So I'm going to start with definitions. And I want to warn you that the vocabulary in this field is dynamic, it's contested, and in some places it's actively adversarial. And what I mean by that is that some of the words I'm going to introduce here have been intentionally redefined in some communities to make them difficult to use, to make it harder to talk about some of the problems that we face. So misinformation is a term we hear a lot. Misinformation is information that's false, but not necessarily intentionally so. Whereas disinformation is false or misleading information that's purposely seeded and or spread for some kind of objective, a political, financial, or reputational gain of some kind. Disinformation isn't entirely false, but it's misleading. It's often built around a true or plausible core and then layered with exaggerations and distortions to create a false sense of reality. It doesn't always function just as a single piece of information, but often as a campaign, many different information actions that work together. And though disinformation is inherently intentional at some level, it's often spread by unwitting agents who are or become true believers of the falsehoods. A third term I'll refer to a lot in this talk is the conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories are explanations of an event or situation that suggest it resulted from a secret plot or conspiracy orchestrated by sinister forces. Now, these three terms have received a lot of attention in recent years, and I think they're valuable for describing certain things, and I'm going to use them. But I'm also going to offer another term, one that has a much longer history in the research, and one that my team relies upon in our work, and that is rumor. Rumors are unofficial stories spreading through informal channels that contain uncertain and or contested information. They're a byproduct of the natural collective sense-making processes that often take place in times of crises or information ambiguity, as people attempt to cope with uncertain information under conditions of anxiety. Rumors are natural. They also often turn out to be false, but some rumors turn out to be true, or somewhere in between. And from this perspective, rumors aren't inherently bad. They serve informational, emotional, and social purposes. And so this is actually where our research began, with a focus on rumors and trying, in some ways, not to overly problematize them. The next thing I want to do, and I mentioned this term above, is this term collective sense-making, and I want to come back to this over and over again in the talk. So I want you all to pay attention here, because I'm going to just mention these things over and over again. So recently, we've made some conceptual progress towards understanding rumors through a data frame theory of collective sense-making. I know I'm saying theory here, but it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Klein and colleagues have argued that collective sense-making, the process that produces rumors, takes place both through facts and through frames. And so by facts, I mean all of the data or evidence we have about the world or an event, including through our own experiences and through others' experiences that are related to us. And by frames, according to Goffman, these are mental structures that help us interpret or make sense of those facts or that data. The facts we have on hand often determine which frames we use, and the frames we use often can help us connect those facts and give them meaning. So frames are both individual and collective. They're both in our heads, and they're also out there in the broader discourse, where they can be shaped through conversations, both organically and strategically. And so in this talk, I'll explain how people are misled, not just by bad facts, but also by faulty frames. And here's our last piece of academic business. Let me talk a little bit about our team's research methods. And these methods have a lot to do with why I'm standing up here today. Because I firmly believe that it was our research methods, our deep engagement with the data at multiple levels that made us early experts in online rumors and eventually disinformation. So our approach builds off the methodological innovation that was being done at University of Colorado by Laisha Palin, who was my advisor there, and colleagues in the field of crisis informatics. This approach adapts methods of constructivist grounded theory and applies those methods to big social data. Our method is a grounded, interpretive, and mixed method approach. We deeply integrate both qualitative and quantitative techniques, blending computational approaches with manual analysis. We visualize data at a high level to identify patterns and anomalies, and then we dive into the data to see what's happening in those places. We often move back and forth between these different perspectives from 10,000 feet and tweet by tweet. One technique we rely a lot upon is the network graph, like this one. It's from the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The nodes here, or the circles, are entities. They're social media accounts or websites, and the edges are connections between those entities. For example, when one account retweets another. These network graphs provide visual artifacts that help guide our qualitative research, which uses them to identify general trends and anomalies, like the strange little red section here, which revealed an early right-wing trolling operation anchored by a deceptive account back in 2010. Another technique we use a lot is the spotlight graph. Now, this is a technique we developed for visualizing how information flows through Twitter or other similar kinds of sites, and especially the role of influencers, accounts with large audiences, in shaping those flows. Now, the x-axis here is time, and the y-axis is the cumulative number of tweets or posts that have been shared by that time. Now, so the individual posts or tweets are plotted along this graph, and they're sized by the number of followers that the posting account had. In other words, they're sized relative to the number of people who would have seen the tweet. This technique, which grew out of earlier efforts, reveals how influencers or high following accounts can spotlight or amplify others' posts, helping them to go viral. Okay, so now for a glimpse at some of the research findings, which is what we're all here for. Well, findings, and we're going to put them together in some interesting ways later. Between 2013 and 2016, our team conducted more than a dozen studies of online rumors across different crisis events. And I want to give a huge shout out here to iSchool professor Emma Spiro, who's a collaborator in much of that work, and Bob Mason, who was actually here for the first study, as well as the National Science Foundation, which funded this research. Our first study of online rumoring examined social media use, specifically Twitter, in the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombings. Now, this was a horrific event and occurred in April of 2013. Together with the events of Hurricane Sandy a few months prior, the bombings represented a sort of tragic inflection point in the evolution of how people use social media during crisis events, and a point of recognition of how collective sense-making could go awry in online environments. Using APIs that were publicly available at that time, we collected about 10 million tweets related to the bombings. We then employed a combination of network graphing, temporal visualizations, and manual analysis of tweet content to identify several rumors that were spreading in that conversation. And we found three salient types of rumors. One type was what we refer to as a sense-making rumor, where mostly well-meaning people were just trying to make sense of the event. And after the bombings, there was considerable activity around trying to identify the culprits. And in several cases, the crowd got it wrong, including pointing the finger at innocent individuals like this young man. Though most of the online sleuthing activity appears to have been well-meaning, in some cases, the the sense-making effort seems to have been intentionally manipulated, with people introducing false evidence to support certain theories. After the real culprits were found, there was a moment of collective reflection as people recognized how digital volunteerism could turn into digital vigilantism. Another type of rumor is what we might call clickbait. Clickbait rumors were cases where people purposefully spread sensational and false claims to gain attention. They often include images, like this false claim that a little girl was killed running the marathon was accompanied by an image, likely lifted from a Google search, of a little girl running a completely different race. Bad actors were beginning to recognize that they could leverage these events to gain visibility, that the attention they captured could lead to instant cash through a crowdfunding activity or reputational gains, long-term reputational gains, followers that they could exploit later for other reasons. A final category of rumor we identified in that first study was the conspiracy theory. Now, from our perspective, conspiracy theories look like sense-making, but a corrupted form of sense-making where the theory that the event was orchestrated by secret forces is predetermined, and then the audience works to try to find information that will fit into that theory. In this case, the claim was that the real perpetrators were Navy SEALs or some other US government agents. And on the graph, conspiracy theories tended to take place within the more political areas of the conversation. And I want to note that in 2013, conspiracy theories seemed like a small part of the conversation. We almost chose not to feature them in our initial paper because I didn't want to be up here standing on a stage talking about conspiracy theories for the rest of my life. But here we are. After that first study, we completed several more studies of online rumoring during other crisis events and breaking news events. And here are a few things we learned along the way. So initially, we actually went into the space thinking that we were going to find existence of prove the existence of a self-correcting crowd. And the crowd would somehow find the falsehoods, they'd be quickly called out, and the truth would rise to the top. But that's just not what we found. What we found was that the crowd was rarely self-correcting, that rumors, over and over again, rumors spread faster than verified facts. We also saw that professional journalism just couldn't keep up with the pace of news. They were busy verifying things, and the information was flowing too fast. Sense-making can go awry or be intentionally manipulated. Bad actors were exploiting these attention dynamics by spreading rumors, and they were becoming baked into the network as influencers. And over time, we began to see that rumoring, and conspiracy theorizing in particular, was becoming an increasingly salient part of the online discussion during crisis events. What had seemed marginal was growing more central. And initially, I'd pushed my students away from focusing on conspiracy theories, and over time, we realized that we just couldn't ignore them. Around about 2015, our research on online rumors began to lead us, following many users of the social media platforms, down the rabbit hole. We stumbled in from a couple of different directions, but what we found at the bottom was often very similar. So let me go back to a simple observation that we had about conspiracy theories during the Boston Marathon months. Among other quirky characteristics, one thing we noticed about conspiracy theory tweets in our data was that they often cited or linked to a multitude of strange websites, at least they were strange to us at the time. And when tweets about other rumors linked to websites, they were usually articles debunking the false claims. But these conspiracy theories linked to like sometimes dozens or hundreds of different websites. And a lot of them we'd never heard of, including, sadly, at the time, I wasn't familiar with InfoWars, but I became familiar with it afterwards. Now, the tweets about these conspiracy theories provided a window into what we might call the alternative media ecosystem. And these are two different views from two very different conversations. On the left are websites cited in tweets linking to articles about the White Helmets. They were a humanitarian response organization that was working in Syria and was targeted by a Russian disinformation campaign. And each of these, on the left, my notes are scrambled. On the left are websites that were cited by people discussing conspiracy theories about shooting events in 2016. Now, this ecosystem consists of different kinds of websites: clickbait sites, websites almost exclusively covering conspiracy theories, state-sponsored propaganda from Iran and Russia, and hyper-partisan media outlets. I and my team spent a few months doing deep qualitative content analysis of the websites in this graph, and I do not recommend that. It took months for us to recover. The content was disorienting and depressing. We found that many of the websites didn't just carry one conspiracy theory, but they featured many conspiracy theories, from claims about UFOs to vaccines to pedophile rings. We began to think about how folks encountering this stuff might start to see the world through a corrupted epistemology, where they repeatedly interpret data about the world through a frame of distrust and conspiracy. Around this time, our team began to understand that we weren't primarily looking at rumors and accidental misinformation, but pervasive disinformation that was sinking into the fabric of the internet, into the recommendation algorithms, into the networks of friend-following relationships, in ways that would be increasingly hard to unwind. This alternative media ecosystem was gaining prominence in part through the spread of rumors, conspiracy theories, and disinformation. And this ecosystem contained messages targeting both the far right and the far left. Its content was resonating with the rise of right-wing populism around the world. And state-sponsored information operations like those from Russia were actively shaping this alternative media ecosystem, spreading inane conspiracy theories at times, but also reinforcing this corrupted epistemology and subtly pushing propaganda and disinformation for geopolitical advantage. In our early work, we occasionally used the term disinformation, but we really didn't understand what it meant initially. Now, that changed after 2016 as we and other researchers, journalists, and the public became aware of the Russian government's interference in the US political discourse at that time. Our team's insights into this campaign actually arrived a bit accidentally by a project that wasn't initially part of our Rimmering research. In 2016, a few of my students were studying framing contests within Black Lives Matter discourse. As part of that work, we created a retweet network graph of Twitter users who participated in conversations around shooting events in 2016, including several police shootings of Black Americans, where users employed either Black Lives Matter hashtag or the Blue Lives Matter hashtag. And this graph revealed two separate communities or echo chambers on either side of this conversation. Pro-Black Lives Matter accounts were on the left, and most of these accounts were also politically left-leaning or liberal, and then anti-Black Lives Matter accounts on the right, or accounts were consistently politically right-leaning or conservative. And when people talk about online polarization, this is what it looked like structurally in 2016. The two sides created and spread very different frames about police shootings of Black Americans. At times, the discourse was emotional, divisive, and honestly uncomfortable for our research team. There were racial epithets on one side and calls for violence against the police on the other. We published this study in 2017 in October. A few weeks later, in November, Twitter released a list of accounts that they had found were associated with the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, Russia. They'd been running disinformation operations online targeting US populations during the same period of time as our Black Lives Matter research. Going through a list of these IRA accounts. I remember it was at nighttime, it came in, I actually saw a tweet about it, I looked it up, and I went to Twitter's site, and I realized that I recognized some of the accounts that were associated with the Internet Research Agency. We'd featured some of those accounts in our paper. Their names, their handles were in some of our tables about being some of the most retweeted accounts in this conversation. And they'd even been the authors of some of the more troubling content that we'd reported on. So quickly, my collaborators on this project cross-referenced the list of Russian trolls against this graph to see where these trolls were in the conversation. Now, this might not surprise you now, but this did surprise us then. Troll accounts are mapped here in orange, and the graph reveals that the Russian disinformation agents were active on both sides of the Black Lives Matter conversation on Twitter in 2016. They weren't doing the same thing on both sides, but they were there on both sides. A few were among the most influential accounts in the conversation. An orange account on the left was retweeted by Jack, then CEO of Twitter. And several orange accounts on the right had integrated into other grassroots organizing efforts on the conservative side and were repeatedly retweeted by right-wing influencers. So it turns out we're all vulnerable to rumors and disinformation, especially online, where it's difficult to know who we're communicating with, as well as how information was created, where it was created, and how it got to us. So the events of 2016 led to an increased awareness of our vulnerabilities online. In the aftermath, there were thousands of media articles, hundreds of research studies, as well as considerable work by social media platforms to attempt to address these vulnerabilities. When we reflect upon the story of online disinformation in 2016, we think of it predominantly as foreign in origin, perpetrated by inauthentic actors or fake accounts, and coordinated by various agencies in Russia. Now, that's not the whole story. In fact, that's not even half the story. But that's the one we told ourselves, an easy one that allowed us to focus on outside actors and top-down campaigns. But fast forward to 2020, and we saw a very different story, particularly when we looked at false claims of voter fraud, claims that were at the center of the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. That effort was primarily domestic, largely coming from within the United States. It was authentic, perpetrated in many cases by blue check or verified accounts. And the 2020 disinformation campaign wasn't entirely coordinated, but instead largely cultivated and even organic in places, with everyday people creating and spreading disinformation about the election. Let me try to explain how that worked. First, political elites set a frame or a false expectation of voter fraud. For example, in this tweet posted in June of 2020, then President Trump claimed that the election would be rigged, that ballots would be printed and ostensibly filled out in foreign countries, and that this would be the scandal of our times. This voter fraud refrain was repeated over and over again in the months leading up to the election. It became a prevailing frame through which politically aligned audiences would interpret the results of the election. And it led to that kind of corrupted sense-making process I mentioned earlier. Eventually, Trump-supporting elites, social media influencers, and online audiences would collaborate to produce hundreds of false claims and narratives. A prime example of this was Sharpiegate. This is the second Sharpiegate. There was another Sharpiegate, but this is the one about the election. There's a lot of gates around here. This narrative began with a number of people posting stories from different parts of the country describing how they or someone they knew or heard about had been given Sharpie pens to vote, and how the pens had bled through the ballots, and how they were worried that their votes wouldn't be counted because the pens bled through. Now, these claims were especially salient in Arizona, which was a swing state that could have made a difference in the final results at the national level. Officials there attempted to correct these concerns on Election Day, explaining that the ballots were designed to be used with Sharpie pens, and that the bleed-through wouldn't affect the vote counting. But these official statements did little to alleviate concerns, which grew as more and more people shared their fears. Initially, the tone of many Sharpie tweets was one of concern, worries that the votes wouldn't count, directives to bring your own pen. But as time went on, the content took on a more suspicious tone, as social media users began to interpret the evidence through the frame of voter fraud. And eventually, the discourse shifted to the explicit accusation that this was an intentional effort to disenfranchise specifically Trump voters. And this shift occurred as the content began to take off and go viral. Here we have two views of how the term Sharpie spread in election-related Twitter data. Now, the graph at the bottom is a basic temporal graph, and this highlighted section in red shows the highlighted section shows the volume of tweets per minute during Election Day and up to the moment when this false narrative begins to go viral. And the top graph is one of our spotlight graphs showing the cumulative number of tweets on the y-axis at the same time. The Sharpiegate conspiracy theory began in the accounts of everyday people with small accounts, often voters who were misinterpreting their own experiences. You can hardly see them there. They're in that little red box. But it begins to take off with the help of a small set of influencers, social media accounts with millions of followers. In many cases, this occurred through spotlighting, where a small follower account shared a claim, like this one, claiming that this was Democratic voter fraud and that somehow these ballots were not going to count. And then a large influencer would amplify this claim, sometimes with the just asking questions style, so they didn't have to take responsibility for the claim that it was false. As the Sharpiegate rumor spread, it echoed across influencers with even larger audiences. These included political activists, media personalities, and President Trump's two adult sons. Many of the false claims we tracked followed this similar pattern: origins in small accounts with few followers, and then amplification from influencers with increasingly large audiences. In this case, the influencer accounts had picked up on the Sharpiegate rumors and were actively pushing them with this voter fraud framing right as the rumor begins to spread widely, and right after Arizona had been called by Fox News for Joe Biden. And so they were seizing upon these Sharpies as a potential reason for that and claiming fraud. If we look more broadly across the course of the election 2020 conversation, we find a finite number of repeat offenders who were repeatedly influential in spreading content related to the big lie. And we created this list of Twitter accounts that were highly retweeted and spread at highly retweeted and spreading 10 or more different claims of voter fraud. And again, they include President Trump, his adult sons, as well as a cadre of right-wing media pundits, political operatives, and influencers. So, let me get a little water. Perhaps the biggest contribution of this study and all of our work on disinformation is this. Disinformation isn't just coordinated manipulation by foreign spies and scammers. It's not just outsiders manipulating our discourse, and it's not just top-down. Disinformation and propaganda more generally in the modern era is participatory. Elites in media and politics collaborate with social media influencers and everyday people to produce and spread content for political goals. Participatory disinformation takes shape as improvised collaborations between witting agents and unwitting though willing crowds of sincere believers. These collaborations follow increasingly well-worn patterns and use increasingly sophisticated tools, and they've become structurally embedded in the socio-technical infrastructure of the internet. Let me show you a graphic that shows how these collaborations between political elites and audiences work, starting with the big lie example. So political elites repeatedly spread the message of a rigged election, which set an expectation of voter fraud, and this became a frame through which the events of the election were interpreted. Online crowds generated false and misleading stories of voter fraud, reinforcing that frame. Sometimes these stories were produced intentionally, with knowledge that they were false, but often they were generated sincerely through misinterpretation. Political activists and social media influencers would help to amplify those stories, passing the content up to political elites. And political elites echoed the false and misleading stories back to their audiences, reinforcing that frame, building a sense of collective grievance. The audiences echoed and reiterated that growing sense of grievance. And we saw violent language and calls to action began to increase. And political elites began to mobilize and organize the audiences into a series of lawsuits, rallies, and protests. And eventually one of these leads to the violent attack on the US Capitol on January 6th. So participatory disinformation makes for a powerful dynamic. It's enabled by social media, but it also implicates the broader media ecosystem, from conspiracy theory websites to cable news outlets, as well as some members of the political establishment. These tight feedback loops between elites and their audiences seem to make the system more responsive, but also may be leading it to spin out of control. We can see similar dynamics supporting right-wing populist movements all around the world. Let me show you another example. On September 10, 2024, Donald Trump stood on the debate stage with Kamala Harris and made the preposterous claim that immigrants in Ohio were eating pets. Now, many people in the audience were perhaps surprised or shocked by the claim, but the story of how this claim ended up on the debate stage looks a lot like the Sharpiegate example. Political elites on the right set an anti-immigration frame in the 2024 election. The frame became a steady drumbeat over the course of the election, from repeated claims of non-citizen voting to misleading narratives about immigrant-driven crime waves. Likely primed by this frame, late in the summer of 2024, a Facebook user in Ohio shared her false suspicion that her neighbor's missing cat had been eaten by immigrants. This urban legend type of rumor was false, likely a misinterpretation of a chicken being cooked at a barbecue. But that didn't stop it from spreading. It began to gain traction, first on Facebook and then on Twitter, and it was reposted or spotlighted by influencers with larger and larger audiences. Leveraging the anti-immigration frame to support their favored presidential candidate, online activists began to use generative AI tools to create images or memes of Trump saving pets. And it's funny, and it's supposed to be funny, and we laughed, but it worked for them, which is one of the sad things. GOP leaders and other political operatives repeated the rumors and amplified the memes, and Elon Musk even gave them his blessing through his account on the platform that he owns and has come to dominate. Donald Trump repeated the false claims from the debate stage, but the story didn't end there. This only brought the rumor more attention, new audiences, and those audiences continued to engage, cheering the rumor on, repeating and retweeting. Often laughing, it was soon became a joke and a jingle with tons of comments set to music. And I know I can still hear that jingle, and some of you can as well. Okay, so what to make of this? Another false rumor that develops and propagates as part of a participatory disinformation campaign, spreading messages that demonize immigrants. I said this before, we're all vulnerable to rumors and disinformation, but the phenomenon is also politically asymmetric. Other work and our work and others have shown that Republicans and Trump supporters spread far more false claims about the 2020 election, which shouldn't be surprising considering the events of January 6th. Other research shows that this phenomenon extends to other topics, not just elections, in other countries, and is tied specifically to right-wing populism, not traditional conservatism. So why? My colleagues and I have a theory, and it's about how right-wing media works, and how right-wing political movements have circumvented traditional media and tapped into the attention dynamics of online media environments and online rumors. While Democrats have continued to rely upon traditional media committed to factual and balanced coverage, which broadcasts their messages from one to many, Republicans have leveraged the dynamics of a new and digital media to build a powerful, explicitly partisan, and participatory alternative media ecosystem, which offers agency to its audiences who can play a role in the deep storytelling of who the party is and what they believe. We see the right-wing media and politics as a kind of improvisational performance that's taking advantages of the affordances of new and digital media. On stage are a theater of influencers performing roles based on a lightweight set of rules or conventions. They follow a loose script, improvising and collaborating towards a shared goal. They don't exactly know where they're going with each scene, but they know what the themes or the frames of the day are, whether it's voter fraud or social media censorship or they're eating the pets. The theater metaphor helps account for the interaction between influencers. They feature each other on each other's shows. They celebrate and amplify each other. There's conflict. Some characters have foils, but at the end of the day, they're all on the same team. This metaphor also provides insights into the interactions between the influencers and the audiences. As they perform, the influencers do call-outs and callbacks with a shared audience who is truly part of the show. The audience cheers, jeers, and steers the actors as the show unfolds. The actor influencers are intensely tuned in, watching the likes, the reposts, the comments, ready to give the audience more of what they want. And the audience has the power to guide the performance. From this perspective, influence doesn't just flow from the influencers up on the stage out to the audiences, but from the audiences back to the influencers. Feedback is instant, and they can be extremely reactive, adapted to their audiences. They build their stories collaboratively. Audience members have agency. They're truly part of the show. At times, the spotlight extends out onto an audience member who shares their story about Sharpie pens or their suspicion that their immigrant neighbor is eating the pets. And the audiences create the content to fill the frames of the day. The influencers amplify that content, and the political leaders increasingly are acting upon it. This is the essence of participatory production, improvisation according to a loose set of rules or norms about how the game is played. The motivation for participation is high. The audience is literally part of the performance. They're not just shaping politics with their vote. They can interact directly with their leaders and shape political rhetoric and the outcomes with their voice. They may feel as empowered as never before. And there are even opportunities for audience members and new content creators to come up onto the stage and become influencers themselves as the spotlights converge onto them. So the right-wing media ecosystem is explicitly partisan and intensely participatory. It emerges from and is reinforced by the attention dynamics of social media. It facilitates better? No. It facilitates collaborative storytelling through engaging rumors and memes. Its gatekeepers have not been erased, they've been replaced by influencers. And these influencers play an outsized role in mediating news and political discourse. They're judged for authenticity rather than veracity, and they can be captured and radicalized by their audiences. All right. So when I first heard that I'd been selected to give this lecture almost a year ago, I had a very different talk in mind. I did. Imagine that. And when I finally began to craft this talk in December, as many of us were collectively making sense of the election results, I was focused mainly on describing why Donald Trump and the Republicans had done so well within online discourse and within the election results themselves. But a lot has happened since then. Facebook rescinded its fact-checking program and anti-harassment rules. President Trump pardoned the perpetrators of January 6, even those who had perpetrated violence. There are efforts underway to change the history of those events so that the heroes are villains and that the villains become heroes. A billionaire owner of the platform that we once studied, Twitter, now X, who's been captured by his conspiracy theory audience, is now taking apart government agencies one by one. Conspiracy theories are animating the self-destruction of the US government, from science agencies to humanitarian response organizations to the departments of education and labor. Conspiracy theorists who have risen to prominence on the dynamics I've described here, in fact, who are nodes on some of those graphs, are now at the helm of our intelligence agencies as well as our health and human services. And most recently, Trump has made US foreign policy statements echoing Russian propaganda about Ukraine. So the stakes are clearly higher than ever before. So I started today's talk with a focus on rumors, but what I've been describing is no longer just accidental rumors and sense-making gone awry. What I've described is a machinery of bullshit that has become intertwined with digital media, has been effectively leveraged by right-wing populist movements, and is now sinking into the political infrastructure of this country and others. And so I'm going to end with this message borrowed from some of my colleagues at the Center for Informed Public. They know who they are, and one of them might be wearing a t-shirt. We need people, all of us, to fight back against the disintegration of reality. We need teachers to keep teaching and researchers to keep doing research. We need everyday people to keep improving their digital literacy to better understand how our sense-making processes have been hijacked by strategic manipulators and the attention dynamics of online systems. We need people to keep speaking out against the attacks on democracy, on human and civil rights, on decency and empathy. And we, all of us, need to start building the social and informational infrastructure to counter this bullshit machinery. Now, this infrastructure needs real journalists to keep investigating and reporting, but we can't just rely upon the logic of traditional media. We can't wait for the New York Times or Washington Post to tell the story or to build the graph or create the meme that helps people understand what's happening around us. We need to leverage the participatory dynamics of the digital age, but complement that with a commitment to truth and of building, not destroying, a just and sustainable future and strong democracy. While our team, and perhaps many of you, were afraid to talk about conspiracy theories, the loudest and most vile voices have run the table. We can't afford to be quiet anymore. We can't afford to be polite anymore. We need to make our voices heard. We need to become the opinion leaders and influencers in our families, on our social feeds, in our classrooms, our churches, and our sports teams. We need to rage against the bullshit machine. That's it. Just want to make sure I did not get all my thank yous out there. I paused too quickly, but really want to thank my research collaborators, Emma Spear at the iSchool, colleagues at the Center for Informed Public. So many students have been a part of this work. My colleagues at Human Centered Design and Engineering, and I want to give a special shout out to Judy Cuse and Nday and Nancy Albrighton and University of Washington for all the support. So me, my research, the Center for Informed Public, our students, I wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be able to do this work without the support of the University of Washington.
Is it? I hope.
You hope?
Is this on? Can you hear us?
Can you? We're better? Oh, we're back.
Okay. I'm Ed Taylor. I'm a professor in the College of Education. I'm Vice Provost of Undergraduate Academic Affairs. So Kate, you can't hear me? I'm not as necessary, but... So Kate, I've never had one of these, but I think what you just got was a standing ovation. It's what I think.
I think it was just the volume of the
It was just a...
volume of the audio.
So I've got a few questions opposed to Kate. I could use a mic that didn't work for you.
I don't know. Maybe it's better for you.
Is that working at all? That's you can hear me okay? So before Kate, take a drink and take a break for a second if you want. So I have a question for the audience. Can you hear me okay? It's a multiple choice. So someone on the stage was a high school legend and a high school basketball All-American. a collegiate All-American and National Player of the Year at the highest level, and a professional basketball player in the United States and in Europe? The answer is A, Ed Taylor. Raise your hand if it's me if you say A. I can't see. Or B, Kate Starbird. You would be correct. It's a good thing my ego is secure, Kate, sitting here with you.
Well, these are my family. They over here, they are.
This is your family, but these people over here were standing too, and not your family. So if you have questions, if this works, 206-616-8160 and questions at UW. Kate, let me start with, you began by studying crisis informatics, the pro-social things that people after disasters did, how people came together, how we shared information, neighbors helping neighbors, which is a fundamentally good thing. And you've described the pandemic as the perfect storm for misinformation. Describe how that came to be and how the pandemic in that moment in 2020 impacted you and your colleagues. You're so good about representing your co-investigators.
Yeah. So we do know that, is that on? Who knows? We do know that during times of uncertainty, rumors are just part of how we make sense of things, right? And so the pandemic had this extended period of uncertainty. It was just going to be natural for people to be trying to make sense of that and to be getting it wrong. On top of that, we had these online dynamics that were sort of already supercharged. Rumors were already supercharged. Conspiracy theory communities were already sort of kind of gaining a foothold in those spaces in 2020. And so the confluence of this event that was massively disrupted, that had an extended period of uncertainty, and the dynamics of our information systems. And I think I wrote something in March of 2020, and I was like, this is going to be a disaster, like an informational disaster, just because of where those dynamics were. And indeed, by May, we could watch and see these networks of accounts. I've showed you these different, like this is one graph I skipped today, these networks of accounts of wellness, new age, anti-vaccine kinds of networks were beginning to link up with pro-Trump folks that were angry with how some of the response was happening, and with conspiracy theorists in the QAnon community. And we could start to see these things come together during this extended period of uncertainty. And then this begins to build, COVID-19 begins to go into election 2020, and these networks that were spreading COVID rumors and conspiracy theories begin to be facilitating the spread of election rumors as well. With some of the influencers in that anti-vaccine COVID-19 misinformation were on the mall on January 6th, and some of them were inside the Capitol building. And so you can actually see the intersection of those networks online and in real life.
Let's talk about algorithms for a moment. In some ways, I find comfort in being able to go to social media and see that I'm surrounded by people who are like-minded. In some ways, it's become a community for me. But yet it can become kind of an echo chamber. Are algorithms part of the solution, part of the problem? Where's the nexus here?
I'll describe both as the algorithm and the networks are part of why these spaces are so toxic. And it's not just the algorithms themselves, it's how they fit into the attention economy of how certain information rises to the top, and how, and it turns out to be stuff that's engaging, stuff that's novel, stuff that makes us feel emotionally triggered, like outrage and laughter, those kinds of things. Those things rise to the top, and that's not necessarily accurate things, right? That's not necessarily reality. We all know we'd rather watch a show about conspiracy, like a good conspiracy theory, than a movie about, just the factual things about what happened at some point, right? Like these are things that are compelling, they're entertaining. And the algorithms are kind of designed with that, not designed, the algorithms have in some ways emerged to give us what is entertaining to us. And those algorithms were gamed in some ways. They became they would reify things. So if you started to look at one conspiracy theory, you might get recommended more. If you start to look at someone who's sharing a certain kind of political view, you're going to get recommended more people that have that political view. And so the algorithms profoundly shape what we see in online environments. And so we have this idea that everyone's voice is equal, but that's not exactly true. The folks that were able to game those algorithms gained an outsized voice on these platforms. So that fits into those influencers that I talked about.
One of the many reasons I'm grateful for you, Kate, is in 2020 when we had to go online as a campus, we thought it would be a good thing to provide the very, very best teaching, the very best scholars that we have to our students on campus, all 3 campuses, and did an asynchronous course. And you were the first person that I asked to do a lecture and provide some content for that moment in time in 2020, and you said yes. And one of the things that I was struck by with you was you have the ability to talk in fairly complex research to a range of people, from community members, high school students, just the general public. Everywhere I looked, you were on television, you were in social, you were somewhere, and yet there's a great degree of criticism of this work. Why are the critics so harsh in response to you, and how has that impacted you and your colleagues?
This could be a 2-hour conversation, maybe a 2-year one, but I mean, quite succinctly, there are people and people with a lot of power at this point who have gained their power by exploiting these systems. This machinery of bullshit, as I commented on, and there's a technical term there. It is, as I cited something for that. It's a technical term for bullshit. And that is that it's a conversation, it's a speech that's meant to be persuasive without regard for veracity, right? So it's not necessarily true or false, it just doesn't care, right? And there are people that have benefited from this machinery, from the way that these systems work and from exploiting them, and they've gained these outsized voices, and they don't want people to understand how they've done it. They don't want solutions to address it. They don't want content moderation. They don't want the platforms to be redesigned. And so when researchers go to try to expose that, when we create a table of like, here are the influencers that spread, that repeatedly spread lies about the 2020 election, that puts us on their radar of folks that they don't want talking about this. And so quite interestingly, they use the accusation of censorship to silence researchers, or to try to silence researchers like myself. And some of them have been effectively silenced. And so I think that's why the criticism comes. And I think it's been really hard on our team. I think it's been hard on students. I think it's been hard on the staff at the Center for Informed Public. I think I personally lost almost a year of productivity just like trying to figure out how to respond to some of the criticism. But it also has made us stronger, and we've realized, you know what, what are you gonna do now, right? Like, you know, once you've been criticized and you build up some scar tissue, and I think it's actually helped me and some of my colleagues just be more firm in what we're able to say now, and not willing to sort of cow to some of this, I think would say, bad faith criticism. It's strategic criticism.
I'm just looking at my texts. I've never had so many texts that have the word bullshit in them. Some of them have to do with your talk. How do we fight against this bullshit machine that you speak of? What tools do we have?
It's a throwing spaghetti against the wall kind of moment. I really do think it is. And I say kind of towards the end of the talk that we do need journalists to keep telling us stories and reporting, but the way that professional journalism works is not, like from one to many, is not necessarily well adapted to this moment. And the right has done a great job of exploiting the participatory dynamics. I think we have to find ways to help people tell their stories about what's happening in this moment, and to get that, to amplify them and to get those out in the world. We have a set of social media platforms that, and some of them are so toxic I won't use them anymore, but there's some that, you know, our friends and family are there. If we want to reach them, we may have to go to those platforms, but we do need to find platforms where we think we can speak our truth and get that truth out to people. What I've been telling my friends and family is like, each of us needs to be an influencer or opinion leader in our own groups. We were so scared for so long to talk about these things, and we kind of got a little bit uncomfortable. And I think we need to go back out. We need to have conversations. We need to tell the stories of what's happening right now and find ways to get those out into the world.
Why hasn't the left been able to exploit this kind of misinformation, disinformation, social media in the ways that the right has?
Well, if you have a commitment to truth, it's hard to spread disinformation. That's part of it. Also, the left in this last election really tried to, and everybody's mad at the New York Times and the Washington Post and these things. They tried to rely on traditional media to tell their stories. But traditional media does not have the same commitments as the partisan right-wing media does towards how they tell stories, how they create their content. And so you're comparing things that are completely asymmetrical, right? Like you don't have the traditional media, legacy media, is not going to do for the left what the far right alternative media ecosystem is doing for the right. The left needs to find something different if they want to fight back.
There's a question from students. As university students entering our careers, what are some key skills or research areas we should focus on to pursue a career in understanding misinformation? How can we best contribute to this field in terms of research and practical applications?
There's no one answer to this. I think this field is so profoundly interdisciplinary, and it has to be. We need historians, we need data scientists, we need, folks who understand how to tell stories, we need storytellers, we need journalists, we need computer scientists who understand AI, we need legal scholars who can understand the law and how things fit in. I think the most important thing is to be a little bit balanced, to capture a couple of those things. The students that do best in on our research team have interdisciplinary backgrounds, are double majors, a lot of the undergraduates, like history and computer science. I think Jim Maddock, who's one of the first students on our Boston, I think it was undergraduate student who was a lead student on our Boston research, was a history and HCDE major. Caitlin Zhou was HCDE and something else. I mean, I think the interdisciplinarity is what I would encourage, and to not leave the humanities behind. I think, if anything, we need them more than we ever have before. I'm an engineer. But we just can't leave the humanities behind. I think it's so important.
I'm going to go off script in a second.
Yeah,
Kate.
I've been doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Because I've been following your career and your research, and there have been moments when you'll say something that comes off as kind of subtle, but you wondered out loud whether or not you could continue your work, you and your team, at a public university, because the response had been so harsh and so critical and so painstaking for you. And it made me realize that this work that you're doing is tremendously courageous, but it comes at some cost. How do we protect researchers that are doing this kind of work and who are committed to the truth? At a deeply personal level, I'm glad you stayed here. I'm really glad you stayed. And you mentioned it matter-of-factly after a meeting, and I thought, and as I walked in the door and I noticed the number of officers that were here that aren't normally here, I found myself thinking about the gravity of your work and the courage it takes to do this work. How do we protect scholars like you?
I am hugely grateful for how the University of Washington did respond to the things that we were experiencing. And I don't mean the University of Washington. It doesn't like operate all at once. It's like people. It's people that are in this room. A lot of it was the leadership in my department, leadership at the iSchool. So Julie Keats and Ning Day, folks that stood up for us within the university, and they helped explain, like, these attacks are bad faith. There's a reason for it, as I explained earlier. And this is really important scholarship that needs, that we need to have a space for. And that, to be honest, like, that is what gave me the courage to keep going. There was a time, like, it was some rough I mean, it's rough now, but I think we had a preview of what was coming to the rest of the world because we've been, some of the people that you're hearing that are characters right now in this world have been characters in our life for the last couple of years. And we have known them. They've given public records requests to us, and many with 40 plus public records requests to the Center for Informed Public or me directly. And so some of the things the University of Washington has done just helped to reduce the burden of those requests has been hugely important for our team. Helping with legal support when we've needed it has been really important. I had to do an interview in a hostile interview with a congressional committee, and it was really nice to have really great legal support sitting next to me in that. And so I think knowing that the University of Washington was there to step up and support us has been, I told somebody I was going to see a counselor, and I saw her a couple times, and then I said the third time, I was like, I don't know if I need to see you anymore. I'm feeling okay. She goes, well, what changed? I'm like, well, I realized the University of Washington is behind me.
I want to go back to the pro-social things that you started your research with. Okay, do you have hope that social media information systems can go back to the heart of the work that you started with, pro-social, neighbors helping neighbors, communities keeping each other safe? How do we get back to that fundamental purpose?
Those features are still there. Those capacities are still there, but I'm looking at some of the colleagues that have studied and critiqued these systems for a long time, longer than I have, Beth. And I think a few folks may say that there have been some malignancies that have been visible to folks using these systems for a long time. And some of the same features that help protesters organize things in the Arab Spring have been used by white supremacists to gain visibility and power using these systems. And so I do think there's opportunity for redesign. I think there's opportunity for us to vote with our feet and go to platforms where we feel safer, where the discourse is more reality-based, other kinds of things. But I don't know that we're not always going to be dealing with an information system from here on out that is not the ones that we grew up in, and that does have some real challenges, and we're just uniquely vulnerable as humans in these systems because of the ways these systems have evolved, especially when it's an attention-based economy. And I mentioned that a little bit, but we don't have that time to unpack it. But the way these systems work is they capture our attention, and they're there to keep us locked in. And that dynamic means that some of these malignancies are there to be exploited, both accidentally and intentionally.
Breaking news, there's been a sighting of a shark in Drumheller Fountain. So you might want to avoid that. It's true. It's right here. It's right here. There's a picture and all. It's true.
It is raining.
It is raining. See? Came up through Montlake, the Montlake shark. In this moment in time, in light of the work that you do, in light of what you see going forward, what gives you and your team a sense of hope in this work?
I don't know if I could speak for my team here, but I know that my sense of hope has always, not always, but in the last 5 years for sure, been really anchored on interacting with the young people and the junior scholars who are doing this work and how committed they are, not just in this space, but across a lot of the adjacent spaces of young people who are really working on hard problems where the stakes are very, very high, and where they may not always feel like they're winning at the end of the day, and they're still out there working on those things and trying to make a difference. And that, to me, just to see them, their courage, and to know that, very quickly, and maybe at the end of the day, we're passing on that baton, right? Like, these are the folks that are going to keep going. And a lot of us, like, things don't feel great right now. There's a lot of things that are pretty frightening if you're at a university and share a certain kind of a set of values, and a lot of things that we'd hope maybe we're going to defend democracy like 5 or 6 years ago. Oh, if we can just do this, we can stop things from happening and things are going to go back or whatever. things are profoundly changed. And we're going to have to start thinking on a much longer timeline of clawing back some of the rights that people are losing and some of the freedoms and things. And so I do think that for me, my hope is with these junior scholars who understand that the timeline is long and they're dedicated to keeping working at it.
You told me once in a class that you let go of your athletic identity because you wanted to really put yourself fully into your scholarly identity. But are there any lessons that you take from your truly? If you haven't looked at Kate's bio, it's a world-class bio. It's quite unique.
My family's laughing.
Your family's yeah. Are there any lessons that you take from your career in athletics that can apply to your work in a public university at this moment in time?
Yeah, I would say you're not quite capturing exactly why I wanted to leave behind my athletic identity. It was not enough time here for that. But part of that was just a lot of sadness of having left one career and having to cope with that. But also kind of wanting to see if I could do something else. And so for years, as a PhD student, I don't think my advisor had any idea that I was that I had been a very good athlete. And the folks they really it didn't come up. And so I was really able to just be a completely different person. And for a while, I couldn't necessarily see the connections between that first career and this career. But I'll tell you, in the last maybe 2 years, but definitely last 6 months, I've been using a lot of sports metaphors. You can't win if you only play defense, and a lot of sports metaphors coming out. And I will say, when things got really frightening a couple years ago, when we were feeling a lot of the attacks, and I saw a lot of my colleagues kind of ducking and covering, not here at the University of Washington, but other places, totally understandable, because it was pretty frightening. And I feel like having that first career and having a lot of positive feelings about, especially in Washington State, in Seattle, knowing that a lot of people knew me, had good feelings about me, that I was able to take some risks around standing up and fighting back. Maybe a little bit of courage from being an athlete or something else. I do feel like I've began to lean a little bit more on my first career when things started to get heated with this research.
Any questions you wish we'd have asked?
What happened with the audio? I'm still signing there ever. They missed the last 3 slides. There was the whole punchline, but that's okay. But the folks here are the most important, and so, yeah.
So I simply want to conclude this way. I've been watching Kate for years. So I knew Kate before she knew me, but all the more profound in 2020. I kept looking for colleagues around who would stand up and lead, not just our university, but our community and our nation during a time of real difficulty and crisis. And then prior to the election, I kept looking for people to stand up during a time of real difficulty and crisis. And Kate was one of those people I kept seeing over and over again, pre-tenure, post-tenure, with a level of courage that I don't think I've ever seen at the university before. So if you wouldn't mind just joining me and doing a second standing ovation for Kate Starbreeze.
Thank you. Thank you.